Sin has taken a terrible toll on the universe like we saw in the fall of man. It affected the stars and the whole universe. The next judgment we come to, and again it's the cause of this, is man's sin. And it's going to affect the whole earth that we live in. And it seems like we're slow learners as humans, that we don't realize that sin's a bad thing. And this thing just gets worse for mankind. This one is Genesis 6 through 9, judgment on the earth. It's the flood of Noah. There are waters above. It says there was a firmament in the midst of the waters that divided the waters from the waters from below and the waters above. And there's a firmament, solid material in between. And we're going to see that I don't take the view that the waters above today are way out in the remote parts of the universe, but because that would mean that outer space is a firmament, and it's not firmament at all. And there's not really even young Earth creationists believe that there's a fabric in space of time and space, but that's just not true. There's nothing there. The natural realm before the flood, the waters above. Thus God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so, Genesis 1:7. The atmosphere, and I take that to be the firmament, divides the waters above from the waters below from the waters above. It would be, the waters above would be like a water canopy, the waters above, probably as water vapor. This is a view that's been put forth by Morris and others before him, but Henry Morris, 50 years ago, promoted this. He's a hydrologist. He was the head of the department at Virginia Tech, and a very powerful man in sciences. And he promoted this idea, and you'll see later why this is probably the only way that you can interpret the waters above, and the firmament as being the atmosphere. The water canopy, the waters above, was probably a water vapor that would surround the earth above the atmosphere. Like I said, well, today it's very cold. I was outside most of this week, and it's never gotten above freezing. And but it'll be 80 degrees, 90 degrees, 100 degrees here in Kansas in the summertime. But like I said, above us, when it's 100 degrees here, it's like 50, 60 below 6 miles up. When you fly in the big airliners, you can see sometimes they'll post the outside temperatures, and I've seen them as low as 70 below, 80 below flying. But then you go above that, and it gets very hot again, 1,300 degrees, because that's where the solar radiation first impacts the upper atmosphere. It's very hot up there, and you could dump a lot of water in there. The waters above supplied some of the flood waters. The windows of the heavens were opened in Genesis 7:11 as the water canopy collapsed as rain. We don't have waters above that we can see. Even these people that propose that it's on outer limits of space, you can't see it with our most powerful telescopes, and we can look up to 10 to the 24th kilometers into space. That's a long ways out there, and there's no water out there. Effects of the waters above, water canopy in the upper atmosphere before the flood. You get moderate reflection of solar radiation, moderate greenhouse effect of the water canopy, providing a mild, semi-tropical climates for abundant plant and life at both poles, north and south poles, as well as at the equator. Uniform temperatures, climate over the earth, such as Venus, same temperature at the poles as at the equator. Venus, I don't know if you know it, we've been able to probe it, and the temperature at its poles, even though it doesn't rotate, the canopy that it has, a very heavy atmosphere, spreads the temperature so you get the same amount of radiation at the poles as at the equator. Even though it doesn't rotate 24 hours a day, it rotates only one every 240 years. It's locked to the sun. So we have an example in our solar system of what a canopy will do. Fossils of all the sedimentary layers, the key index fossils and fossils in them, except the most recent one, that's the Pleistocene, show uniform global temperatures. In other words, you have huge coal beds in maybe the largest in the world in Antarctica, made out of tropical plants and everything. So, and you find this all over the earth. In other words, in every sedimentary layer that we have, except for the last one, you have no polar regions, you don't have any temperate zones. Everything is a uniform temperature over the whole earth from poles to equator. There's no rain from weather force fronts colliding because there's no temperature differences and no temporal zones. Genesis 2:5 says that there's no rain. Well, you'd only have that if you have uniform temperatures over the earth. Also, without temperature differences, there were probably no strong winds, but very gentle breezes at best on the earth. Effects of the waters above, this is before the flood again. The water canopy would protect from strong solar radiation with less DNA damage and with longer life for plants and animals. Water is one of the best protections against solar radiation. You can look, I think it's still at K-State, they have a nuclear pile down in this water, and you can look at it, it's glowing down there, but you're not damaged because the water absorbs the radiation. It has a very broad spectrum for absorption. So what would happen if this was surrounding us, the solar radiation, the high frequencies ones, the damaging ones, would be ultraviolet on up to X-rays and gamma rays, would be intercepted and absorbed by that zone, and they not only spread the temperatures out as they degrade the radiation to frequencies to give you a uniform temperature, they'd also protect whatever's here from these things going through our systems, our DNA, and damaging them. That's one of the reasons we age, is because our DNA gets damaged with entropy and goes downhill. It also allows for longer life for plants and animals. The atmospheric pressure would be higher than today, caused by the additional weight of the canopy waters above. Venus' heavy canopy creates an atmospheric pressure of nearly 90 times what the Earth is. In other words, as you put more things in the atmosphere, it pushes it down and the pressure increases. It doesn't change the percentage of oxygens and nitrogen and everything in our atmosphere, but it increases the pressure. You can see the reverse take place. If I run here on this at 800 feet above sea level, I can run real well, but I go to the top of Pikes Peak and I run out of air. And everything does. As you go up, the pressures decrease. As you go down, like the Dead Sea, the pressures are even higher. But if you put a lot of moisture in its upper atmosphere, it loads it down. Plus, this cold layer prevents that from precipitating down in storms. But again, we have examples in our own solar system that we can see, so we know what would take place if you had a canopy, vapor canopy around the Earth. You would have giants in plants and animals would exist in a hyperbaric, this is a high pressure atmosphere, which would allow higher body metabolism for larger animals and denser air for flight of larger animals. Particularly reptiles and trees never stop growing and reach incredible sizes with age. And if you can, I don't know if you know it, there's even clinics that do convalescence and surgery under high pressure deals, and you heal faster. We're not sure exactly why that is, but you'll heal faster. But at the present time, we can only support about a 6-ton elephant in our present atmospheric pressure. That's why Hannibal didn't have too much luck in running his elephants over the mountains. They run out of breath up there. And in fact, you can take something like a whale, a 100-ton whale, and it'll beach itself, and you can water it down. It's got lungs and everything to live on land, but it'll die. Why? Because it doesn't have the lung capacity to maintain its body weight. And also we know from fossils, however, that there were land animals that weighed 100 tons walking around on the earth. Well, they would gasp and die today. Pterodactyls, 25-foot wings. There's not enough air for their metabolism to pump those wings. That's why birds can only fly so high. They run out of atmospheric pressure. And also these big animals, like the flying ones, like the pterodactyls, you have to have a density of air to get the lift. Present atmosphere, they couldn't fly. There's not enough air to get aerodynamic lift, and there's not enough oxygen to give them metabolism to pump those wings to generate the energy. And so your reptiles, trees that don't ever stop growing, would grow to enormous sizes, and they could live in that hyperbaric, high-pressure atmosphere that they can't live today. All plants and animals according to their kind in the Genesis creation, so there's no possibility of flora and fauna kinds mixing with other kinds to produce an infinite and probably deadly variety of kinds combinations. In other words, if you crossed a mosquito with an elephant, lose everything. Or sharks with even fishes. They can't go out and hunt. They can't survive. If you cross these characteristics, it's very distinct that God's given each variety to live in its environment. Bacteria that can live at 400 degrees Fahrenheit all the time in the bottom of the ocean or in these hot pools. If they lose those, then they can't live. So God put these strong barriers between the kinds so they can't cross over genetically to each other and kill each other off. These genetic things also make it impossible to have evolution, because you can't jump from one kind to another kind. And especially when you get into sexual reproduction, you have to have two of them of the same ones at the same kind of the new kind arriving at the earth at the same time, at the same point of maturity, and they have to mate to propagate that new kind. They can't go back to the old kind. That's a definition, is that you can't sexually cross lines. And it becomes impossible when you get into sexual reproduction where you require male and female. And also your genes have to be split and come together, and that's not possible if you don't have the same genes. Almost all the present kinds on the earth exist in fossils without change. In other words, as you go back, they all look the same. And conversely, some of evolutionary's ancient kinds are alive today and changed, and they're known as living fossils. Fossil records in the sedimentary rocks indicate that animals and plants in the pre-Noahic flood creation were spread over the uniform temperature Earth, including Antarctica and Arctic, as I mentioned. Huge coal beds of extinct semi-tropical and tropical plants are found worldwide, even in Antarctica and Arctic regions. I mean, how are they growing down there? Well, they said they were all one continent at one time. Okay, that's fine. How does that solve that problem? It doesn't. You can't put the things on the one end of the continent up. You can't get everything crowded into the equator region to grow. And these lycopods and these other things that form these huge coal beds were growing in very tropical conditions. In Siberia, on the equator, and everywhere you find these fossil beds, they're all growing in the same temperature climate. Many extinct animals, the mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed tigers, bisons, wolves, hippos, crocodiles, camels, of the original creation were frozen in the Arctic region after the flood. In other words, they are living up there. What are they doing up there? You go out to Colorado and you go up to, say, Florissant, and you find these tropical plants growing up there, and they're at 9,000 feet. And say, well, what was this doing here? How'd they get here? Were they just shoved up here? And it's not possible. What I'm saying is, none of it fits into the scenarios that they want to give you to believe. And you can't do this unless you believe that these conditions existed before the flood. Also, they would say that these geological layers are products of millions of years. Creationist model, as we're going to see, says these are all a product of 1 year that trapped all these things. And it came from a time in which there was a uniform temperature. Let's look at the celestial bodies before the flood. The sun, moon, and stars were immediately visible through the water canopy, the waters above, and the atmosphere, the firmament, after their creation and before the flood. In other words, Adam and Eve saw everything, and we can see about they estimate 7,000 stars we can see, or planets, within they'd see it immediately. Einstein's special theory of relativity would say, well, you couldn't see the first star until 4 years. That's how long it would take at his speed to travel to the Earth. They're immediately available. The region above the atmosphere will support a reasonably large amount of water, creating a water canopy around the whole Earth. Since the water canopy absorbs solar radiation effectively, the warmer temperatures of the canopy would hold a large amount of water to give the Earth a uniform temperature, worldwide temperature, and they protect life from destructive radiation. Other things about the celestial bodies. The water canopy high above the earth cannot be too dense, however, because the light from celestial bodies would be absorbed and reflected by the water canopy and would not allow light to reach the earth's surface. And that sunlight, let me give you an example. It'd block out the sunlight if it's too dense. Sunlight, for instance, at the equator is totally absorbed at 3,000 feet of ocean water, leaving a total darkness. In other words, light traveling through a transparent medium, like clear ocean water, is absorbed as it goes down because each molecule that absorbs it gives off, reflects back up as much as it allows to go down. Then the next ones below it pick it up, and pretty soon you don't have any light. And if this canopy was too dense, even though it's vapor, it's transparent. But if it's too deep, the molecules will absorb all the radiation and reflect it. That's why Venus is very bright. And you won't get a greenhouse effect on the earth. You'll get darkness and coldness on the face of the earth, just the opposite. And a lot of the creationists hold to the fact that, well, there couldn't be a canopy because it would create a greenhouse effect too hot. They don't understand the what we call albedo, a reflection, absorption and reflection. The molecule gives off at 360 degrees and it gives as much off as up as down. Then the next ones pick up that half, and they reduce it by a half, and they reduce it by a half, and pretty soon you don't have any light traveling through this canopy if it was too dense. So it's light enough that you can see through it, but it's not too heavy that it absorbs all the light coming through it, even though it's transparent. Which light will do? The molecules of water will absorb a tremendous amount of radiation. They have a very broad absorption band. Mankind before the flood. The pre-flood, this is a funny term, antediluvian. It means before the deluge. Race had longevity. The average age was over 900 years. You know that from Genesis 5. Many of the antediluvian humans were giants. This is in Genesis 6:4. Possibly, I take this position, but I'm not staying hard on it, possibly the product of fallen angels and the daughters of men. This is in Genesis 4 with 2 Peter 2:4 and Jude 6. It says that the sons of God went to the daughters of men and had offspring by them. And in these other passages it says the angels are locked up in chains because they went after strange flesh just as they did in Sodom and Gomorrah. In other words, Sodom and Gomorrah was sodomy and bestiality and everything. And these angels crossed over. They're not supposed to. These demigod giants, their offspring of men and angels, are probably the basis of the heroes of ancient mythology, Atlas and Hercules, who had one human parent and one god parent. The term is used, Raphaim, it means exalted ones, or Nephiim, the fallen ones. Those are the terms that are translated as giants in Genesis. And some of them existed before and some of them after the flood, which is another complication. In contrast to the wickedness of this perverse generation is Enoch, whom God translated before the flood out of his evil generation. This is in Genesis 5:24, like Elijah after him. Enoch pronounced judgment on his generation. You have that in Jude 4 and 14 and 15. His rapture and godly life served as a foreshadowing of the rapture of the church before the great tribulation which is yet to come upon the earth. Before the flood, the sin of ungodly unions and sinful actions of the antediluvian or pre-flood race resulted in God's judgment to destroy all animals, including man, by a worldwide flood. Noah, preacher of righteousness, and that's the term that's used of him in the scriptures, is chosen by God to build an ark for the saving of himself, of his family, and of the mates of all animals and birds on the earth. This flood would kill all land animals and birds of the antediluvian world and would change the geophysics of the earth and its climate forever. After the flood, God establishes his covenant with Noah and his descendants, all of mankind, and set up a new dispensation for all of mankind, which continues to this day. That, one, it establishes human governments with the right of judgment, including capital punishment. That didn't exist before the flood. There were no governments before. There weren't police and things like that, or judges or courts or anything. It allows diets to include eating of meat, which was not allowed before the flood. It placed the fear of man and animals, which was not before the flood. And it reduced the age of man exponentially over successive generations to 120 years. God says his days will become only 120 years, and no one surpasses that today with good documentation. God's view of the antediluvian mankind. So God looked upon the earth, and it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. This is in Genesis 6:12. I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast and creeping thing and birds of the air.